This is Dave Schuman here for Success for Life podcast. We're on episode 3. Welcome my guest, Joe Lafferty, speaker and author, football coach, survivor of cancer, somebody who has really gone on and overcome some amazing obstacles, and we'll let him tell you all about that. But he's one of the main reasons he's on. He wrote a book called Just in Time, talking about his faith, his fight for his life, his coaching background, and how it all kind of comes together. Welcome, Joe, to the Successful Life podcast.
Thank you, David, so much. Love the podcast. Try to get to it as much as I can, but I'm a little behind, so I guess I'm really going to have to get through and catch up to myself. I'm probably in the middle of the second season. I like listening to podcasts as they happen, or as you know, I like to catch up, kind of like binge watching on Netflix. So I'm binge listening to your podcast.
Excuse me, because I got a little cold I'm getting over here, but yeah, that's good. Binge watching, you'll get a lot of good tidbits over the course of the 3 years. Good stuff. Tell everybody a little bit about your background, and then we can really kind of roll from there.
Well, I was born and raised in Football Center here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Born in 1972. The first time my mom left the house, I was born in the fall, September of 1972. First time my mom left the house after I was born, she went to a Steeler game where the Immaculate Reception happened. And because she's 5'4", she missed the whole thing because everyone stood up. But she was there, and I was really born into the football dynasty here in Pittsburgh. And as a kid, I was into. I started swimming, and I took to it. I guess I'm part fish, and so I started swimming at 6 and competitively at 7. By the time I was 8, I was swimming year round, and even at the age of 9, had a national rank. But that summer, I was 8 years old. Went on a camping trip with my dad and a group called the Indian Guides, which was like the Boy Scouts, except your dad was with you. And we went on this vacation, and I was snoring so loud, I drove all the other guys out of the tent. And, you know, my neck was swollen. My dad took me to the doctor, thought it was swollen glands. It turns out it was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So I had 2.5 years of chemotherapy and radiation. And through that, still kept swimming competitively. It was really my dad that first day, July 14th, which is actually my sister's birthday. They told me that I had cancer. And it was my dad who was talking to a very active 8-year-old. And my dad is not a football guy. I'm not sure if he knows whether it's stuffed or blown up. He may know now after all my experience, but he said what a coach would say, like, hey, you're going to be sick. And when you're not sick, you know, you can go get up and go do whatever you want, or you can lay on the couch for the next 2.5 years. Well, I was an active athlete. I said, I'll just lay around if I'm sick, but if I'm not sick, I want to be at the pool. I want to be playing basketball with my friends. And it was right towards the end of my chemotherapy, the fall, where I left my school district and went to a Catholic school for one that ended up being just 2 years. And I was introduced to football, and I was the 12th man, which ended up being a 13-man team. And I showed up the first day of practice, and I want to tell this story because it leads to a great connection. I showed up the first day of practice, and I was the tallest kid on the field. And this was in 5th grade for me. This was a JV Catholic school team. And I was the tallest kid. And we started practice, like I said, 12 of us. And the varsity coach came over and said, who's the big blonde kid? And my head coach, Steve Orlando, said, well, that's the kid from Forest Hills. And he said, no, that's not him. The kid from Forest Hills is taller, and he has red hair. And they both looked at me, and I said, oh, yes, Josh isn't here yet. So Josh pulled up late. He was late to everything, his mom and dad. And Josh came out, and he was even taller than me at the time. So we had 12 guys, 2 of which were 4th graders. They never touched the field. But the draw to today is Steve Orlando is the father of Todd Orlando, who was on the field. Todd's just a grade older than I am. I played with Todd Orlando, who's now the defensive coordinator at the University of Texas.
Yeah, Todd Orlando was coach at UConn for a while. That's where I played football at. If I'm not mistaken. Yep. I'm familiar with him. He was there with Randy Edsel back in the early 2000s. Heck of a coach. So tell me about, You had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. What was that like as a young kid, having to overcome that and having to, I mean, that's got to be something that's really difficult for anybody at any time. But as a kid who doesn't really know what's going on, it shed some light that some people that may be going through some things like that with their own kids or even themselves.
Well, I don't think anything happens by chance. And I had lost 3 of my grandparents the previous year, and one of which to cancer. My great-grandmother, my grandmother, and then my grandfather who lived with us. So I knew death. I understood life and death, and I knew it was part of it. And I was given a 70% chance of survival. But I completely understood, and my parents were straight shooters, I completely understood that meant 7 out of 10, 7 out of 10 chance I could live and 30% chance I could die. And that sounds like great odds if you're betting $5 in Atlantic City on a hand of whatever. But those are not great odds if you're a parent. And, if I walk into Thanksgiving and there's 10 of you, and I say, hey, 3 of you aren't leaving here. Those are awful odds when it comes to your child. But my parents focused on the positive. They were both salespeople at some point in their career. And my mother ended up being a career teacher. So they knew how to present information, and they presented me with all the upside. And my dad's simple. You can lay down if you're sick, but if not, it's be as active as you want to be. That would take me through the rest of my life. Through 2 years of chemotherapy and radiation, I only had one true setback. I had all the normal hair loss and fatigue. I had pancreatitis. And then when I was 13 years old, which was the end of my freshman year of high school, I became an insulin-dependent diabetic. And I went on to play high school football at Woodland Hills at a very high level. Not me. I didn't play at a high level. I was a small cog. I was a small cog on every team I ever played for. But I played at Woodland Hills with a lot of D1 guys and against a lot of D1 guys. And I also played college football at Mercyhurst as an insulin-dependent diabetic. So I didn't know quit. I only knew to just keep going. And despite whatever happens, just keep going. And that's one thing that I stressed with the players. And I didn't have this stellar career. I got suspended from college for fighting my end of my freshman year. So I had to take my sophomore year of college off and serve out a suspension for what was pretty stupid, and no one really got hurt. But colleges don't tolerate bad behavior. So in 1992, I was paid to coach football at Woodland Hills, not much older than the guys on the team. Jason Taylor had just left. He had gone off to Akron to play with my best friend I graduated with. And I coached in 92. After going to college and then to Memphis for a year, I coached in 1995 and 96. And then after I lost my eye living in Dallas and working for the Cowboys, I lost my eye to a staph infection. I moved back to Pittsburgh, and I coached from 2002 to 2013. And in that span and just being affiliated with the program, I was able to coach and touch the lives of 15 future Hall of Fame guys, 3 of which are still current. Four guys are still currently in the NFL from my coaching days.
What did you learn about coaching and working with young athletes that you found was real relevant to things that you're doing now and writing your book and telling your story?
Well, our head coach, George Novak, who was the head coach of Woodland Hills for the first 30 years of Woodland Hills, it was a combination high school back in the mid-'80s. My sophomore year was the first year of that high school. What he taught us from day one, he had 2 things. Number one, coach every kid every day. And that attention to detail and touching each kid every day was very important. And the second one, treat every child like he's your son, every kid like he's your son. And on our team, we had the understanding dads or coaches. We had the understanding coach dads. We had the drill sergeant. Myself and Larry Whitehurst were some of the drill sergeant guys. And you can love your drill sergeant, but they're a little tougher and they're a little meaner. And that's fine. But it takes a village of coaches to coach up kids, and that's what we did every day. And when I learned that children and the kids you coach need discipline, they need understanding, it made us all better coaches. And I don't know about anyone else, but I think it's an axiom. It's a truism, rather. You learn more from the kids than they learn from you, because you learn how to deal with people. You learn, if you get into their lives like I did, and became this positive influence. Before you know it, you wield this incredible power, and you need to honor that as a coach, because you need to stay back as they're growing. The high school guys, as they're growing up, they're going to make their own decisions. George had a big thing about, we don't influence guys on where they go. So when they'd ask us, well, what do you think? Should I go here? Should I go there? We say, hey, you need to go there. You need to gather all the information. This is the most important decision you're going to make of your young life, is where you're going to go to college. Now, it's not a life or death situation. If you don't like it there, if you're uncomfortable, you need to share that with your coaches while you're there, and you need to, maybe move on if that's the case. And George Novak had lived through that himself. He had a funny story about that. So as a coach and an influencer of those young guys, I just took it with honor. And really, when it came to, you led by example, you were the best man you could be, and you let those guys follow that. And that was an honor, and I'm blessed by every guy I ever coached, not just the 15 that went to the NFL.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about your book. You have some huge endorsements there with Gronk and Tom Brady and Super Bowl champs, and those guys helping to put that stuff together. Talk about the book, why you wrote it, and some of the important parts that you hope people take away from it.
Well, if Forrest Gump was born in the early 70s and born in Pittsburgh, I'd be him. I've lived in 5 other cities. I worked in sports. I worked alongside some of the biggest names in sports. As a kid doing volunteer work for the Leukemia Society, I got to become friends with Dan Marino. And there's no one bigger than Danny in Pittsburgh. And that's why he said to my co-author who interviewed him for the book, he contributed. He told my co-author Jeff Schober, who wrote Growing Up Gronk with Gordy Gronkowski, he said, Joe called you Danny. And Dan's reply was, anyone from Pittsburgh calls me Danny, because I'm Danny Marino to people from Pittsburgh.
Right.
And he's still the biggest thing here in Pittsburgh, in my opinion. But I got those relationships, and when I got to know Dan as a teenager, I learned quickly that they're just regular guys, and that they're fun and they're serious, and they're just human beings. So that served me well working in sports and being around famous people. They just want to be treated like everyone else. They don't want you to invade their space. In all the years I worked with some sports guys, and I'm talking one-on-one, a basketball game operations or a football game operations, I don't have one single autograph. I never asked anyone for an autograph. I don't even have a Rob Gronkowski autograph. I have a cell phone number, but I don't want an autograph. I have my stories, and I have my interactions, my 2 interactions with Dick Vitale, my interaction with Rick Pitino, that happened 2 times too. And I was just never scared to walk up and say, listen, I know who you are, and I really admire what you do. And not be obtrusive and ask for a selfie or get an autograph. So I'm too old for selfies back then, but
right.
At any rate, I learned. So that's part of that. So that's the book. The book is not only did I survive cancer and become an insulin-dependent diabetic. When I was in my late 20s, I was working in Dallas. I'd gone from working for the Dallas Cowboys on the radio side to working at a sports talk radio station, 1310 The Ticket. I got a staph infection from a bad cut I had on my head, and I lost my left eye to a staph infection. And they said, well, we can wait a couple of days, and that staph infection could go to your head, or we can take your eye out. And I said, I need some time to think. And they said, you can wait till tomorrow morning. And I said, oh, no, I need 5 minutes. And they left and came back, and I said, praise God, you take my eye. And so then things went downhill from there. I moved back to Pittsburgh. We have amazing hospitals here. Not that Arlington General Hospital wasn't great. They really took care of me, too. We moved back to Pittsburgh just in time because my organs started to fail. I had a pulmonary embolism, and then my blood pressure shot up, my cholesterol shot up, and my kidneys were failing. So I went on dialysis and got evaluated for a double organ transplant. They were going to give me a kidney and a pancreas. Pancreas would mean I wouldn't be a diabetic anymore, insulin-dependent diabetic. And while they were evaluating me for that, and this goes along, follows in the book, they found something wrong with my heart, and I needed 2 steel heart valves. And this was from all the radiation that I received in this area. That's likely where it came from, because I had 2 really leaky heart valves and no blockage, because I'd lived a pretty healthy life. And they said, well, we need to do a heart valve surgery. So that was July of 2008. And I was trying to get in for the surgery, and I just it kept getting putting off by the doctors. Finally went in for the surgery in July of 2008, and it was on a Friday. And I remember that Friday vividly. I could pick out the anesthesiologist. And when I woke up, I asked my father, what are you doing in the recovery room? And he said, well, Joe, it's Thursday. And here I had been out for 6 days. Monday morning after my heart surgery, I'd been alert and got out of bed the day before, and I flatlined, and I was down for 7 minutes. Flatlined, dead, like you see on television. And they brought me back and put me on a cold bed like they do when someone injures their neck for a day. And when I woke up Thursday, I thought it was later that day, Friday. And I lost those 6 days. And Coach Novak had a saying, you know who your friends are when you lose. Because you're a high school football coach, you're on a winning streak. People are coming down to the field and wanting to interrupt practice and just say hi because they want to be around the winner. You know who your friends are when you lose. So I know who my friends are, because even though I wasn't conscious and I had died and I was unconscious and definitely unstable, I still had friends come and sit with me the last 15 minutes of every hour. And it was that's how you know. So I got out, and 35 days after I flatlined for 7 minutes, I stood on the turf at Texas Stadium, and coached Woodland Hills against Northeast High School. Yeah, Northeast High School outside of Dallas. It was 109 degrees. I probably shouldn't have went, but I did, and that started me on the road. And then that fall, November, I got put on the kidney pancreas transplant list. And 15 months later, I got the phone call. And on February 14th, which is National Organ Donor Day, 9 years ago, I got my double organ transplant. And it's been great ever since. 2 years after that, I met the family of the young man who gave me his organs. His name was Justin. And Justin was in a car accident with 5 other teenagers in the middle of the day. No one was drinking. It wasn't wet. They got rear-ended by a truck driver who admitted on the scene that he had taken his eyes off the road, and it closed the distance where he could have stopped. And Justin hit his head. He sustained a head injury and was never conscious again after the wreck. And I got his kidney and pancreas, and his family, Rhonda and Scott, gave up all of his organs. They couldn't give his heart because it had been damaged. And I'm the only one that contacted them, and we met, and we became fast family. And in that meeting, I came to learn that Courtney, his then 15-year-old sister, now 22-year-old sister, her favorite human being on earth was Rob Gronkowski. And I was able to facilitate a signed jersey for her Sweet 16 birthday, unbeknownst to her. And then we've been up to Foxborough twice, and Rob's been an incredible host. He knows my story, so he knows who they are. And, when I called him the first time, I said, well, you remember my donor? And he said, yeah, the Busards. He knows their name, and he's an incredibly kind guy. And that's a lot of the book, but there's a lot of other stories in the book. So, like I said, if I saw my life as these great sports moments with Jerry West and Dick Vitale, and in Las Vegas and in Dallas and in Memphis and in Miami. And other people saw my life as these once-in-a-lifetime medical things that I overcame. So I thought, well, I'm going to put them all in the book. And I am a man of once-in-a-lifetime things. But in my mind, I think my story is a Pittsburgh story. And Pittsburgh is about tough people and steel and now great healthcare. So I think my story is like if Forrest Gump were from Pittsburgh, and it was true because my story is true, and Forrest Gump is a fiction.
What is it about Pittsburgh that has made it such a football powerhouse over the years? Is it the fact that originally it comes from steel and so many people blue collar and have a blue collar attitude and know how to fight through tough times? What has it built that culture down there in that Pittsburgh area?
Well, I'm betting you know this because you're a student of the game like me. Friday Night Lights was going to be written about one of two places: Odessa, Texas, or Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. And because the basis and the reason in college back in the early 90s, 100 years ago, the reason we read Friday Night Lights was the psychological story of Friday Night Lights. Oil was leaving Odessa, and it was becoming very corporate. So the local people weren't having a lot of success with jobs. So as the surplus and the excess left, people focused more on the high school football because that's what they had. Now Odessa is not. There's no major NFL team, but here in Pittsburgh, like Aliquippa, it was steel. Steel was declining. As steel declined, the Steelers were on the upswing. So Pittsburgh has taken a very hard love of football in the absence of success. And the great thing for me and the great thing for the city of Pittsburgh is we had a great mayor named Richard Caligiuri, the great late Richard Caligiuri, who saw this coming and initiated a renaissance where we went from steel and manufacturing to healthcare and technology. And that's why UPMC is one of the world's greatest healthcare systems, and places like Carnegie Mellon and Pittsburgh are academic centers. Carnegie Mellon University right here in Pittsburgh is regarded as one of the greatest engineering schools in the world. So they moved away from steel and manufacturing. So Pittsburgh's very prideful, and we have a lot of pride in what we do. It's also very ethnic, and when I say that, I mean we're diverse, but we're very close. I'm only half Irish and half Italian. I have friends that are 100% of one or the other. And even though we've all lived together, we're still very ethnic with our traditions and our foods. And, we share a lot. And I think that's why Pittsburgh is so close. And we all have those things that we fall together on. It's your high school football team, and it's it's the Steelers and it's Pitt. And so we all love football, and it doesn't hurt that so many legends came from this area.
No, I think what's really amazing is that when you talk about football and the importance of it, it brings together, different nationalities, races, colors, creeds, doesn't matter who you are. You're forced to learn how to work together and get along and embrace each other's differences. I think that's one of the things that we're lacking, is that a lot of people get caught up in their own territorial tribes instead of working to figure out how they can get along. And you can look right to a football team and figure that out probably better than anything else in society. And it's I always find it's interesting to me because football was under attack for quite a few years. And hopefully we're starting to get a little bit out of it with some of the safety measures that have come into play. But obviously it'll never go away with the concussion stuff, as long as that continues to be, if that is a true fact with all that science related to concussions. You're definitely going to have a situation where there'll always be some people hesitant. But I think football brings together people in a unique way. It brings together talented communities and I think people can look to football more than anything else. And I find it interesting. I think you commented on short podcast I did on Malcolm Gladwell, and it's funny because so many people praise him, and I've read quite a few of his books, and I think the guy's a very smart guy. But when I see when people launch an agenda that they don't know about anything about, and attack things that have been so good for so many people, I kind of, that stuff bothers me. And if you're going to attack something, you should have the facts as far as the hundreds and hundreds of millions of families that football's been a very, very valuable part of for most of their lives. And nobody says the things that don't happen. Football's a tough sport, played by tough people, but there's so many beautiful things that come out within relationships. And I tell people I have an NFL agency as well, and interns that work with me are guys that actually came to some of my camps, and I've helped guys that play for me get internships or jobs at other companies, and that kind of cycle continues to go into football. And football uniquely understands that, and maybe because you rely on so many other people. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have a lot. I'll come back to Malcolm Gladwell, but my story. I've worked for 3 Division I athletic programs, one of which didn't have football as a sport. Go Pirates, Seton Hall. Yeah, though they didn't have football when I was there. I don't know if they've gotten one since.
No, they don't.
I knew they did at one time because they had a T-shirt in the bookstore that said Seton Hall football. So I, of course, bought that one. They were back when I was there in 98, 99. They were strong in basketball and baseball and soccer. But yeah, I don't even know where it's going. But no, it's people. Football does bring people together, and sports in general. And people don't know. And one of the things I found really amazing is I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson and what Jordan Peterson says about analysis. And Malcolm Gladwell is a great storyteller, but before I saw the video that you posted, I saw him. He's a great storyteller. He's amazing, and he does have some very admirable missions and some. I mean, you can read anything and find wisdom in it if you're seeking wisdom. So he definitely has some wise things to say. And for example, Malcolm Gladwell did an amazing TED Talk about the fight of David and Goliath, and I think people should watch that. But it takes faith out of the entire equation, and that's interesting because I like that. But he kind of diluted the battle of David and Goliath, and really puts it like Goliath was the underdog, which is really kind of a funny way of looking at it. And none of us were there, so you can lean on your faith, or you can kind of lean on his beliefs and halfbacks. And when I listened to his speech about football, it was very, and your young people who listen to this podcast or watch it, and maybe some older people, I think this is something we learn with age. And the sooner you can learn this as a person, you need to look at all sides of a story. Just because you see a story on television networks, which like I watch Fox, I watch CNN. Just because you read something in a newspaper, you're seeing one person's one side of it. And there may be facts in that story, but there may be other facts. It was Tony La Russa who said, stats are like a bikini. It can show you a lot, but it can't show you everything.
That's a great line.
So yes, I use that often. So Malcolm Gladwell, that particular podcast, and I've never listened to any other one. I may once I get caught up on yours and some other things. But I listened to that one podcast, the whole thing, and what I noticed was he'll give the disclaimer of this has never been proven, and then play a soundbite to someone says the concussions changed my boy. Well, that's how that person feels, and that's fine. But there's no science to that whatsoever. They've only studied the brains of football players who have exhibited those signs. That is what Jordan Peterson would call a univariate analysis, only taking one variable into an analysis. And they've only studied, I think I heard what he was talking about, 120 or 130 brains,
right, that
all played football. Look at me. Look how big my head is. Look how skinny my neck is. And I was a receiver, and I got decapitated. I got spun. I got knocked out of bounds into things. Plenty. And I was a quarterback also in high school, so I got sacked and drilled into the ground. And I got to tell you, it was fun. But I never had a concussion. So you can't – and I know I coached a kid who played at Pitt, Mike Caprera. He's a coach now. And the width of his neck is more than half the distance between his shoulders, and he's never had a concussion. So it can't be the width of the neck. That might be one factor. So, there's so much to learn about this. It's still very early. Malcolm Gladwell pulled out smoking, and people still smoke. That's what we can choose to do. I have a friend who graduated Woodland Hills with me, and he went to the University of Miami as a defensive lineman. His name is Terrell Green, and he got down there, and he didn't want to sit behind Warren Sapp, and they had some other good defensive linemen, and Leon seriously said, Terrell, play offensive line. So Terrell started 3 years at center for the U. Art Keogh, who recruited Terrell, also recruited The Rock. He's in my book. Art is, and he's a great Irish warrior poet. So Terrell played 3 years, and he had a cup of coffee with the Steelers. He had an awful separated shoulder in the Senior Bowl and never came back from it. But he has sons, and his one son is an academic whiz kid, and he's going to get academic scholarships, and he plays a little baseball. And his other son is fighting for the bees, and he's a good football player, so he's going to be looking to pay for college with football. And Terrell works, and his wife's a hospital administrator, but college is very expensive, and these people know, and Terrell and Ethelyn know that you got to do all you can to pay for your education. You got to try and help your kids come out of school with as little as debt as possible so they can get a good jump on their lives. So Malcolm Gladwell doesn't understand a thimbleful of football, but he tells a compelling story from one angle. And his podcast isn't really a podcast. A podcast is two guys like this exchanging ideas or disagreeing or agreeing on something. His podcast is a television show. There's a lot of production value to it, and there's a lot of mood music and sound bites. And it was a compelling story that he told. But it's one story of how many? They've studied 130 brains, David. How many guys have banged heads like you and me, and millions of others?
Absolutely. And then you could go as far as they had an interesting the study that just came out that actually women's soccer is the largest contributor of concussion. So I always say that the soccer organization has done, not just in the United States but throughout the world, has done a fantastic job of being able to control that story in soccer, because if the fact that girls soccer has more concussions than football is pretty amazing. So I think that story it's the story of in our culture. Here are men being violent. We don't want men being violent. So this goes along with that desire to change that part of our culture. And taking, like you said, one side of the story. If you were to watch football from the outside and you came down from another planet and you watched football and you saw guys tackling each other and banging into each other, you wouldn't understand what the strategy is and everything that goes into it. But once you get involved and immersed in it and understand it, the things that are learned from it are immeasurable. And so I think that's a really important part of it. And I think that, like, obviously, I think in football as a whole, we had to kind of play catch up on it. So that's probably why we were at a disadvantage to being able to construct a story. And that's just really because of because I think the media, and doesn't matter what political side you're on, but the media, obviously, especially more of the mainstream media, is I wouldn't say against football, but it's definitely hesitant towards it, and that kind of lays into that a little bit more. But I think that now that we've caught up to the fact, we're able to start to tell the story. And as we start to tell the story, that story changes and becomes very favorable to the benefits from it. And books like yours really go to tell the story of, not just what you've overcome in life, but the ability to impart that on some of the young people that you've been a part of. And being able to help them continue to grow. And those stories, and now the stories that we relay here on this podcast, continue to tell the message. And I it's funny because Successful Life podcast, I interview CEOs, I interview different lot. But I've found among the most compelling people to interview have been guys that, whether they were in business or coach or whatever it is, have some football background, have been really, because the stories seem somewhat common, but at the same time unique. Like they had to figure out how to overcome X in order to become successful or live a better life. And football tells that story.
Absolutely. And a couple things. Number one, people, you keep saying that we're trying to catch up with concussions. And I think it's not what I think that we are trying to catch up, but there's been a trend. And this is just, like I said, this is my fourth Gump-like life. You may remember, I'm not sure how old you are. You look a lot younger than me, but people may remember Mark Kelso from the Buffalo Bills, who wore an extra cap on top of his helmet. And it was because he was prone to concussions. And that was called a pro cap. And my advisor at Mercyhurst, the business department, was a guy named Howard Paul. God rest his soul. He died too young of a heart attack. But Howard Paul was one of the co-founders of Pro Cap. And he had come up with this cap that went on top of the helmet, kind of make Mark Kelso look like the great Gazoo from the Flintstones. But it was for concussions. And what you could do with it, and he showed us, is you could put a helmet, one of these pro caps on a helmet, and it was foam rubber, and it looked just like the helmet color and whatnot. And you could beat the helmet off your knee and not hurt your knee, which was great for injuries. But as they did more research on it, helmets are better when they glance off each other, not when they stop. So, that's how force and physics work, and we don't have time to get into all that. But so I think people outside of the NFL, have been at it for a long time. And like you said, as far as success for life, I just know that things that people do, and like you said, some of the stories are more compelling. The stories of football helping people and teaching people are out there. One of my favorite Christian author speakers is a guy named Steve Farrar, Farrar. Steve Farrar's got some great books. And I heard him give a sermon where a single mom came up to him, because he does men's leadership. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of preachers have specialties. Billy Graham with Salvation, a guy named Tommy Nelson is Love, and the Song of Solomon, and Steve Farrar is men's leadership. So I guess he was giving a seminar, and he told the story. A single mom came up to him and said, "My son wants to play football, and I don't want to let him." And Steve said, "No, you want him to play football, because if you want a man to become a leader in his church, in his family, and a leader for himself, he needs to know that he can get knocked down and get back up. To get knocked down, and it's okay, you can get back up." So I think football, and not just football, but sports in general, teach us to lose. And if you quote a certain guy from Happy Valley, he said, "You learn more from a loss than a win." And that's absolute. That legendary coach is absolutely true. As a pit man, I won't say his name, but we know who I'm talking about. Yeah. You do learn, and you know as a coach, you learn more from a loss than a win. And you watch those losses a lot. You watch that loss film a lot more, because first of all, you find out how close you were to getting it right, but then you learn, okay, in the future, we're going to do this and we can do that. And here, look how close we were to getting this play. Here's the part where it went wrong. And that's what you drill on, and that's what you do for the future.
Those are those teaching moments that are invaluable. I mean, you have to be able to have them in order to continue to improve. And that's always been my focus in as a coach and with young guys. It's like, you don't know how close you are to getting it. You're very close. And then once it clicks, once that actually starts to click, you start to go to the next level, starts to accelerate. It's building blocks. Everything's building blocks. You're building on top of things. And sometimes you're stuck in a certain place, and you got to figure out what you got to do to build the next block. And if you keep doing that, then you hopefully get to the point where you can build a complete house, and that means you're a champion. But you want to get to the point you're constantly striving to build build that house, and obviously until you build that foundation and all those kind of things, and that's where football is huge. Tell everybody where they can get your book and where they can find you, so we can make sure everybody can follow up with you and get themselves a copy.
Well, one thing I want to say, one more plug for football. One more plug for football is this: we want men to be compassionate. We want men to be emotional, to be able to share their emotions, not only to get through the highs but the lows. And where else? And this is going on for I don't know how many years. Where else do you hug a guy? Where else do you bump chests or jump up and bump hips? I don't know what that move's called. I'm sure there's a name for it. But where else do you show excitement with another guy? And it's it's okay. I mean, I came out of the generation. My father didn't show a lot of emotion, but I'm half Italian, so I never stopped hugging and kissing my dad on the cheek. And I'm 46, and he's 71 now. And we'd see friends, and you'd see your football friends in high school, and you'd be away for a while, and I just start hugging my friends, like, hey man, I haven't seen you, and we'd hug, and then all my friends start grabbing me and hugging me, and that's sports. That's good, compassionate men, and who aren't afraid to show emotion. And I think that's we're talking about men, because that's the majority of who's playing football right now, and I think that breeds that. But my book, Just in Time, is named that because my donor's name was Justin, and I'm a Christian, and I'm not responsible for two souls. I'm not responsible for Justin's soul, but I am responsible for the time I have here, and it was given to me by God and by Justin. So I say I live my life on just in time. So living just in time so that's where the title of the book came from. A memoir, my memoir of faith and the fight for life, both spiritually, both in love and relationships. I didn't find the woman of my dreams until I was 39 years old, and that was, like I said, almost 7 years ago. And we're still like we're the same age. We're still like teenagers, and it was one of the crowning achievements of my life is finding someone that I was able to take care of, and she takes care of me. But finding that person, and that's the book. The book's all those stories, and I promised I was going to give one good story. Anytime I get interviewed, I want to give one really great story that's not in the book, just to give you the par of the stories that made the book. So I need to think here for a minute. Okay, this is not in the book. This is a story that's not in the book. When I was in Memphis, and going to the University of Memphis, it was the year after Isaac Bruce had left, and he was a NFL phenom. And I started dating this girl, and she was of mixed race. And we went out to see the movie Disclosure with Demi Moore and Michael Douglas. We went to see the movie, and it was a late movie, and we were getting some food. I wanted food on the way home, so we went by McDonald's. And in Memphis at that time, there was only one 24-hour McDonald's. So as you can imagine, it was packed. So we get in line. We're deep in the line, and I'm with Tamara. And we only dated a couple of times. It wasn't a long relationship. Just very, very, very casual. So I get in line, and I have to go to the restroom. So I leave, and I come back, and who is standing talking to Tamara but Isaac Bruce and Kenny Irvin, who eventually went on to play for the Bills. He was a senior at Memphis back then, and another gentleman, a former Memphis football player, whose name I didn't know then and I don't know now. And they're talking to her, and she's talking to them. And I just came in behind them and started talking to Kenny. And she saw me, and she walked around and took my arm and put her head on my shoulder as if to say, I'm here with him, which was pretty amazing considering Isaac Bruce is a good-looking dude and an NFL player. And she put her head on my shoulder. And back then, I was known as Scarpino's cousin. And the gentleman who was with Isaac Bruce and Kenny Irvin said, Scarpino's cousin's the man. So I looked good. I looked good in front. I didn't take any girls off Isaac Bruce. And I actually have a very close friend who knows Isaac very well. He coached at St. Thomas. He still coaches at St. Thomas Aquinas, which I'm very familiar with their staff and those guys for a lot of years now. And so, yeah, Isaac Bruce envied me for like 1 second. But Tamara and I just had a couple dates, and I haven't spoke to her since. So she was a nice lady, but she really made me look good for a brief moment.
That's a great story. And you wanted to give a shout out as well to somebody, right?
I did. The best quarterback I ever coached. I was a quarterback and helped out with the receivers because I was a receiver in college. But I was a quarterback coach at Woodland Hills for many years. And the best quarterback I ever coached was a young man named Medee Williams. And I've known Medee for, I think, almost 20 years now. And he was such a great kid early on. He had a fire a fire and a spirit. And I took Medee under my wing early on. And, he ate, I'd take him to meals at my sister's. My sister would make these big dinners. Junior year, I took Medee to Michigan to see the Big House. And that's because I had just left Memphis, and Memphis was playing, and I still had some friends on the team. So we went up and got tickets. And first time he'd been to the Big House. And, there's one of those guys, Medee was one of those guys that, had a lot of offers. And I wanted to tell him where to go, and I really wanted him to go to Virginia Tech. And with Druckenmiller was there at the time. But I never opened my mouth, never, ever, ever. And he committed to Syracuse, and I said, okay, that Donovan McNabb's a good guy. And it was years later that I got to meet Donovan, and I knew Medee I know why Medee picked that, because Medee was going places, and he was a solid, good guy. And Donovan was going to be a great mentor. And Medee is very blessed, and he's wonderful. He and I text every day. I love seeing him doing what he's doing. And I got to tell you, I keep mentioning these semi-famous guys that I coached or played with. But like you said about, playing football sets you up for life. I have buried some kids, and that's awful. But there are so many guys out there who are good fathers. Some literally work in the steel mill. Some of them are teachers. Some of them are principals. Some of them are salesmen and pharmaceutical reps. And those guys that I played football with were still tight. And the guys I coached, I see them, and it's no different than seeing Rob Gronkowski or Quentin Jefferson or Lafayette Pitts or Rontez Miles. And I even coached a kid who coached for the Steelers for 3 years. And shout out to Steve Meyer and the whatever that is, the Allegiance football team, because Steve's going to coaching down. He's coached for the Steelers last year, but he's coaching in Birmingham right now. Right. Yep. So shout out to those guys. Shout out to the Birmingham Iron.
Well, Joe, thanks so much for coming on. I mean, story is fascinating. You have me mesmerized for 45 minutes here. I really enjoyed having you on. You guys could go and find this book. They can find it can I get it on Amazon? And
yeah, the book's on Amazon, Just in Time, a memoir of faith and the fight for life. Or you can go to the website, justintimethebook.com, and I am the Joe Lafferty on Twitter.
The Joe Lafferty on Twitter. Thanks so much for coming on for the successful.
Well, hey, I want to tell you there's a special on Amazon today, and you can buy as many copies of my book as you want. I have a friend who owns a store here in Pittsburgh. It's called Yinzer's, and he owns the store, and it's where they sell all the T-shirts and the Steelers stuff. And he'll walk around right up to people and say, "Hey, I'm the owner," and he's not bragging. "Hey, I'm the owner. I want you to know there's a special today. There's no limit on spending."
There's no limit on spending. I love that.
So there's no limit on how many books you can buy. You can buy today on Amazon. You can buy as many copies of the book as you want.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for coming on, and we look forward to following up soon, and maybe there'll be a book too there. But thanks so much for coming on the Successful Life podcast.
David, God bless you. God bless your listeners and your followers. They're following a good man with a great message.
Thank you. Thank you very much.